He bought a broken jailhouse for 40 cents, then found a $15 million stash Outlaws left behind. The auctioneer's hammer fell with barely a sound. 40 cents. That's all it took to buy a crumbling jailhouse that had sat empty for decades. Marcus Sullivan stood alone in the dusty courtyard, holding a rusted key that might not even work anymore. The building looked cursed, windows boarded shut, iron bars twisted from years of neglect, wooden beams sagging under their own weight. Most folks had whispered warnings about the place, said it brought nothing but trouble to anyone who got too close. But Marcus saw something else. He ran his fingers along the stone walls and felt deep gouges carved into the surface. Not random scratches from weather or time. These marks formed deliberate patterns, symbols that seemed to follow a specific sequence. Inside the first cell, more strange markings covered every inch of the walls. Some looked like arrows pointing in different directions. Others resembled numbers, but in a code he couldn't understand. Each symbol appeared deliberate, purposeful, as if someone had spent months carving a message into the stone. The strangest part, the symbols seemed fresh, protected from wind and rain by the thick walls. They looked as clear as if they'd been carved yesterday. Yet this jailhouse had been abandoned since before Marcus was born. He traced one particular symbol with his finger, a circle with 3 lines extending from it. The stone felt different here, slightly loose. When he pressed harder, a section of the wall shifted inward with a grinding sound that echoed through the empty building. Behind that loose stone lay a small cavity, and inside that cavity, Marcus found something that made his hands shake. A rolled piece of paper yellowed with age, covered in the same mysterious symbols he'd seen on the walls. But that wasn't the strangest discovery. At the bottom of the paper, written in faded ink, were 3 words that changed everything. Only the beginning. Marcus Sullivan unfolded the mysterious paper with trembling hands. The symbols made no sense, but something about their arrangement felt familiar, like a puzzle he'd seen before, but couldn't quite place. He stepped back into the main corridor of the jailhouse, studying the walls with new eyes. The afternoon sun slanted through broken boards, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Each symbol on the paper matched perfectly with carvings he found throughout the building. The first symbol, the circle with 3 lines, appeared above the entrance to every cell. The second, a diamond shape with a dot in the center, marked specific stones in the wall. But it was the third symbol that made Marcus's pulse quicken. An arrow pointing downward, carved deep into the floor near the far wall. He knelt beside the arrow and brushed away decades of dust and debris. The floorboards here looked different from the rest. Newer, as if they'd been replaced long after the original construction. Marcus pressed his weight against the boards. They creaked, but held firm. He tried a different approach, running his hands along the edges where the boards met the stone wall. His fingers found a small gap just wide enough to slip his fingertips inside. When he pulled upward, the entire section of flooring lifted like a trapdoor. Beneath lay a wooden staircase leading into complete darkness. The stairs looked solid, despite their age, built from thick planks that had survived whatever abandonment couldn't destroy. A cold draft rose from the opening, carrying the scent of dry earth, and something else Marcus couldn't identify. Not decay exactly, but the smell of things long forgotten. He peered down into the darkness, trying to make out the bottom of the staircase. The shadows revealed nothing but carved into the stone wall beside the opening. He found another symbol from the mysterious paper. This one showed 2 parallel lines with a star between them. Marcus checked the paper again. According to the sequence, this symbol came near the middle of the coded message. Whatever the Outlaws had hidden down there, they'd wanted to make sure only someone who understood their system could find it. The rational part of his mind said to wait, to bring proper lighting, maybe even find someone else to witness whatever lay below. But Marcus had spent years collecting pieces of frontier history, and nothing had ever felt as significant as this moment. He placed 1 foot on the first wooden step. It held his weight without complaint. The second step proved equally solid. As he descended into the darkness, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking directly into the most important discovery of his life. Behind him, the afternoon light from the main floor grew smaller and more distant. But ahead, somewhere in that underground darkness, waited answers to questions that had been carved in stone for decades. Marcus reached the bottom of the staircase and found himself in a small underground chamber carved directly from bedrock. The air felt dry and strangely warm, as if the earth itself provided insulation against the outside world. Light filtering down from above revealed rough stone walls and a dirt floor packed hard as concrete. But what caught Marcus's attention immediately were the wooden crates stacked against the far wall. 6 large boxes, each one marked with the same symbols he'd been following throughout the jailhouse. He approached the first crate cautiously. The wood looked weathered but intact, held together with iron bands that showed only surface rust. A heavy padlock secured the lid, but decades of moisture had weakened the metal clasp. Marcus found a loose stone and used it to break the corroded lock. The metal snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the small chamber. When he lifted the lid, his breath caught in his throat. Gold coins filled the crate to the brim. Not just a few scattered pieces, but hundreds of them glinting dully in the dim light. Marcus picked up a handful, feeling their substantial weight. These weren't cheap imitations or fool's gold. The coins bore mint marks and dates, all from the previous century. His hands shook as he set the coins back in place and moved to the second crate. This one contained paper currency, bundled in neat stacks and wrapped in oiled cloth for protection. The bills looked crisp despite their age, as if they'd been stored with careful attention to preservation. The third crate held more gold, but in bar form rather than coins. Solid rectangular ingots, each one heavy enough to require both hands to lift. Marcus counted 12 bars in total, each one stamped with symbols he didn't recognize, but which clearly indicated official mint origins. But it was the fourth crate that made Marcus realize the true scope of what he discovered. This container held documents, deeds, bank certificates, and official papers that detailed the source of this incredible wealth. According to the documents, this treasure represented the combined savings of an entire outlaw gang that had operated throughout the territory for nearly a decade. They'd robbed banks, held up stagecoaches, and accumulated wealth from dozens of successful raids. One particular document caught Marcus's eye, a handwritten letter signed by someone called the captain detailing plans to retrieve this stash. After things cooled down, the letter was dated over 30 years ago. Marcus sat back on his heels, trying to process what he'd stumbled upon. Conservative estimates put the value of these 4 crates alone at well over $12 million in today's currency, and he hadn't even opened the remaining 2 containers. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He'd bought this jailhouse for $40, expecting nothing more than an interesting restoration project. Instead, he'd uncovered what might be the largest outlaw treasure ever discovered in the territory. But as Marcus reached for the 5th crate, a new question began forming in his mind. If this treasure had been here for over 30 years, why hadn't the captain ever returned to claim it? Marcus broke the lock on the 5th crate with growing anticipation. This container felt heavier than the others, and when he lifted the lid, he understood why. Inside lay a collection of jewelry, silver pieces, and ornate items that spoke of wealth far beyond simple robbery proceeds. Diamond rings, pearl necklaces, and gold pocket watches filled the top layer. Beneath these lay silver candlesticks, ornate picture frames, and what appeared to be family heirlooms of considerable value. Each piece had been wrapped carefully in soft cloth, suggesting these weren't random thefts but carefully selected valuables. A leather-bound ledger rested at the bottom of the crate. Marcus opened it and found detailed records of every item in the collection. Names, dates, locations, a meticulous account of exactly where each piece had been acquired. The handwriting was precise, methodical, almost businesslike in its approach to documenting criminal activity. One entry caught his attention. Riverdale Bank Manager Residence, October 15th. Gold watch, pearl brooch, silver tea service family away for Harvest Festival. The notation was followed by estimated values for each item. Marcus turned the pages, finding similar entries dating back years. This wasn't the work of desperate criminals grabbing whatever they could find. These outlaws had operated with careful planning, striking specific targets when opportunities presented themselves. If you're as amazed by this incredible discovery as I am, and you want to see how this story unfolds, make sure to hit that like button right now and let me know in the comments what you think Marcus should do next. The final crate contained something unexpected. Rather than more treasure, this container held personal effects and additional documents that told the story of the gang's ultimate fate. A stack of wanted posters showed faces of 5 men, each bearing a substantial reward for their capture. The leader, identified as Captain Thomas Richardson, had a bounty of $5,000 on his head. The others carried rewards ranging from $1,000 to $3,000 each, but it was a newspaper clipping that revealed why the captain never returned for his treasure. The headline read, "Notorious Outlaw Gang Killed in Shootout with Federal Marshals." The article described a deadly confrontation that ended with all 5 gang members dead and their bodies buried in unmarked graves. According to the newspaper account, the gang had been tracked for months before federal authorities finally cornered them in a canyon nearly 200 miles from the jailhouse. None survived the encounter, and authorities recovered only a small portion of their stolen wealth. Marcus sat in the underground chamber, surrounded by what had to be the most significant treasure discovery in territorial history. The irony wasn't lost on him. These criminals had planned so fully created such an elaborate hiding system only to die before they could enjoy their accumulated wealth. A new concern began forming in Marcus's mind. He owned this jailhouse legally, having purchased it through proper municipal channels, but did that ownership extend to items hidden within the building? The treasure clearly belonged to the Outlaws, but they were long dead with no known heirs. Marcus carefully replaced everything in the crates and made his way back up the wooden staircase. He had some serious thinking to do about his next steps. This discovery would change his life forever. But first, he needed to understand exactly what legal rights he had to the treasure. As he emerged into the fading daylight of the main jailhouse, Marcus realized his 40-cent investment had just become the most important purchase of his lifetime. Marcus spent the night pacing his small room above the general store, unable to sleep with the magnitude of his discovery weighing on his mind. By morning, he'd made a decision. He needed legal advice before taking any further action. Robert Thornfield's law office occupied a modest building on Pine Street. The sign outside advertised services in property law, estate matters, and territorial regulations. Exactly the expertise Marcus needed. Thornfield looked up from his desk as Marcus entered, a thin man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes. He gestured toward a wooden chair across from his desk. "Mr. Sullivan, isn't it? I heard you bought the old jailhouse at yesterday's auction. Interesting choice for 40. Marcus settled into the chair, trying to appear casual despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "I'm hoping you can help me understand some legal questions about property ownership." "Of course. What specific concerns do you have? If someone purchases a building through legal means, do they automatically own everything contained within that building, even items that might have been placed there by previous occupants?" Thornfield leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with increased interest. "That depends on several factors. Generally speaking, when you buy a property, you acquire rights to everything permanently attached to that property. Personal belongings left behind typically require different consideration. What if the previous occupants are deceased? If there are no known heirs and the property has been officially abandoned, then yes, items found within could legally belong to the new owner. But there are important exceptions." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. What kind of exceptions? Stolen property, for instance. Even if found on your land, stolen goods must be returned to their rightful owners or their estates. The same applies to items of significant historical or cultural value that might belong in public collections. The lawyer paused, clearly sensing there was more to Marcus's questions than idle curiosity. "Mr. Sullivan, have you discovered something in that old jailhouse?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "I found some items that appear to have been left by previous occupants. I want to make sure I handle the situation properly." "Items of value?" "Potentially, yes." Thornfield stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling down a thick volume of territorial law. "The key question becomes whether these items were legally obtained by their previous owners. If they were stolen, you'd be legally obligated to make every effort to return them to their rightful owners. And if the rightful owners can't be identified, then the matter becomes more complex. You might need to involve federal authorities, particularly if the items were involved in crimes that cross territorial boundaries." Marcus felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. The treasure he discovered represented the proceeds of dozens of robberies across multiple territories. Even with the outlaws dead, the legal complications could drag on for years. "I'd recommend documenting everything carefully," Thornfield continued. "Photograph the items, record exactly where you found them, and maintain detailed records of your discovery. If you decide to involve authorities, they'll want complete documentation." Marcus thanked Thornfield and left the office with more questions than answers. The lawyer's advice had been helpful, but sobering. This treasure discovery wasn't going to be the simple windfall he'd initially imagined. Walking back toward the jailhouse, Marcus made a mental list of his options. He could report the discovery immediately and let authorities sort out the legal complications, or he could investigate further, trying to trace the rightful owners of the stolen items before involving officials. Either way, his 40-cent investment had just become the most complicated purchase of his life. Marcus returned to the jailhouse that afternoon with a camera and notebook, determined to document everything before making his next decision. As he descended the wooden staircase into the underground chamber, a new plan began forming in his mind. Rather than immediately involving authorities, he would research the origins of the stolen items himself. The gang's detailed ledger provided names, dates, and locations for every theft. If he could track down the victims or their families, he might be able to return the stolen property directly. He began with the most recent entries in the ledger. The Riverdale bank manager's residence had been robbed just 2 years before the gang's death. Marcus made careful notes about the stolen items: a gold pocket watch engraved with Inion, Teal's DWK, a pearl brooch with distinctive star-shaped settings, and a silver tea service bearing the mark of a Denver silversmith. The next entry described a robbery at the Oakwood trading post. According to the ledger, the outlaws had taken a collection of jewelry from the store's safe, including several pieces that had been left for repair by local customers. Marcus spent hours cross-referencing the ledger entries with the actual items in the crates. Every piece he examined matched the descriptions perfectly. The gang had been meticulous in their record-keeping, treating their criminal enterprise like a legitimate business operation. One particular entry caught his attention because of its unusual detail. A robbery at the Willowbrook Ranch had netted not just valuables, but also important family documents. The ledger noted, "Took deed papers and family Bible along with jewelry. May prove useful for future leverage." Marcus searched through the document crate until he found a leather portfolio containing exactly those items. The deed papers showed ownership of a substantial ranch property, while the family Bible contained birth and death records dating back generations. This discovery gave Marcus an idea. If he could return the deed papers to the Willowbrook Ranch family, they might provide information about other victims. Ranch families typically knew their neighbors and might remember other robberies in the area. He carefully sketched each page of the family Bible, copying names and dates that might help him locate living relatives. The most recent entries showed births and marriages from just a few years earlier, suggesting the family was still active in the territory. But Marcus's research was interrupted by an unexpected sound from above. Footsteps creaked across the jailhouse floor, slow and deliberate, as if someone was methodically searching the building. Marcus froze in the underground chamber, listening intently. The footsteps moved from room to room, pausing occasionally as if the intruder was examining specific areas. Then the sound stopped directly above the concealed trap door. He heard scraping noises as if someone was moving debris around the floor. Marcus held his breath, hoping the trapdoor's concealment would hold up under casual inspection. After several long minutes, the footsteps moved away toward the front entrance. Marcus waited until he heard a door creak shut before allowing himself to exhale. Someone else was interested in the old jailhouse, but who and what were they looking for? Marcus realized his discovery might not remain secret much longer. He needed to decide quickly whether to involve authorities or continue his private investigation. Either way, his time for making decisions was running out faster than he'd expected. Marcus waited 20 minutes before climbing back up to the main floor of the jailhouse. He found the front door standing slightly open, though he was certain he'd closed it securely when he entered. Outside, fresh horse tracks in the dusty courtyard confirmed his suspicions. Someone had ridden to the jailhouse, spent time inside searching, then departed. The tracks were clear enough to show the horse had been shod recently, suggesting the rider was no casual drifter. Marcus examined the main room carefully. Someone had moved several loose boards and cleared debris from corners where the floor met the walls. They'd been looking for exactly what Marcus had found: hidden compartments or secret passages. A folded paper lay on the floor near the entrance. Marcus picked it up and found a hastily scrawled note. "Know you found something. We can discuss terms. Meet at Eagle Creek Bridge tomorrow. Noon, if interested in staying healthy." The threatening tone sent a chill through Marcus's mind. Someone knew about his discovery, though the note suggested they weren't certain about the details. The mention of terms implied they wanted to negotiate rather than simply take whatever he'd found. Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon considering his options. The smart choice would be to involve law enforcement immediately. But the local sheriff was elderly and inexperienced with serious crimes. Federal marshals might take weeks to arrive, during which time the situation could escalate dangerously. That evening, Marcus visited Detective James Mitchell, a federal investigator who happened to be passing through town on unrelated business. Mitchell had arrived the previous week to investigate reports of illegal land sales in the territory. Marcus found Mitchell at the hotel restaurant, studying a map spread across his dinner table, a stocky man with intelligent eyes and graying temples. Mitchell looked up as Marcus approached his table. "Mr. Sullivan, isn't it? I heard you made an interesting purchase at yesterday's auction. News travels fast in small towns," Marcus replied, taking a seat across from the federal man. "I'm hoping you might have time to discuss a legal matter." "What kind of legal matter?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "I've discovered some items in the jailhouse that may have been involved in federal crimes. I want to handle the situation properly, but I've also received what appears to be a threat." Mitchell's expression grew serious. "What kind of threat?" Marcus showed him the note. Mitchell read it twice, then folded the paper and tucked it into his vest pocket. "Someone clearly knows about your discovery. The question is how much they know and what they're willing to do about it. I was hoping you might provide some guidance about proper procedures. The first step is ensuring your safety. This note suggests someone is prepared to use violence if necessary. Are you planning to meet with them tomorrow?" Marcus had been wrestling with that exact question. "I'm not sure. Part of me thinks I should just to find out what they know, but another part thinks it's too dangerous." Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "If you do meet with them, you shouldn't go alone. I could accompany you, but I'd need to understand more about what you've discovered." Marcus made a decision that would change everything. "Perhaps you should see for yourself." As they walked toward the jailhouse under the cover of darkness, Marcus realized he was about to reveal the most significant treasure discovery in territorial history to a federal investigator. There would be no going back after this moment. The die was cast. Tomorrow's meeting at Eagle Creek Bridge would determine whether Marcus's 40-cent investment became a blessing or a curse. Detective James Mitchell's reaction to the underground treasure chamber exceeded even Marcus's expectations. The federal investigators stood in stunned silence for several minutes, methodically examining each crate and document before speaking. "This is the Richardson Gang's complete accumulated wealth," Mitchell finally said, holding up the wanted poster. "We've been tracking leads about their missing treasure for years. Most investigators assumed it had been scattered or hidden in multiple locations." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. "So, the federal government has a legitimate claim to these items?" "Not exactly. The government's interest lies in returning stolen property to rightful owners, not claiming treasure for federal coffers. This ledger makes our job considerably easier. We have detailed records of exactly where each item was stolen." Mitchell Outlaws continued examining the documents, making notes in a small journal. "What concerns me is how someone else learned about your discovery so quickly. Very few people knew you'd bought this jailhouse, and even fewer would have reason to suspect hidden treasure. Do you think someone has been watching the building?" "Possible. Or someone knew about the treasure's location before you made your purchase." Mitchell paused thoughtfully. "Tell me about yesterday's auction. Who else showed interest in the jailhouse?" Marcus recalled the sparse crowd at the municipal auction. Maybe a dozen people total. Most seemed interested in other properties. I was the only bidder when the jailhouse came up. Anyone ask questions about the building specifically? Not that I noticed. The auctioneer mentioned its history briefly, but nothing about hidden compartments or outlaw connections. Mitchell set down the ledger and fixed Marcus with a serious look. I think we should proceed with tomorrow's meeting, but with proper precautions. I'll position men around Eagle Creek Bridge before you arrive. We need to identify who's making threats and what they know about this situation." The next morning, Marcus rode toward Eagle Creek with considerable anxiety. Mitchell had assured him that federal agents would be watching from concealed positions, but the meeting still felt dangerous. The bridge was a simple wooden structure spanning a narrow creek about 2 miles outside town. Marcus arrived precisely at noon and waited, studying the surrounding landscape for signs of movement. A lone rider approached from the opposite direction. As the figure drew closer, Marcus recognized him as Henry Blackwood, a local businessman who owned several properties in town. Blackwood's presence surprised Marcus. He'd expected some rough criminal type, not a respectable member of the community. Blackwood reined in his horse at the center of the bridge. "Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate you coming." "What do you want, Blackwood?" "I want to discuss a business proposition. I know you found something valuable in that old jailhouse. I'm prepared to offer you a generous sum for whatever you discovered. No questions asked." Marcus studied Blackwood's face, looking for signs of deception. "What makes you think I found anything?" "Let's not play games. My grandfather was deputy sheriff when the Richardson Gang operated in this territory. He kept detailed records of their activities, including strong suspicions about where they might have hidden their treasure." The pieces suddenly fell into place for Marcus. Blackwood hadn't learned about the treasure through spying or threats. He'd inherited knowledge passed down through his family for decades. Your grandfather knew about the hidden chamber. He suspected it existed, but never found proof. When I heard you'd bought the jailhouse, I realized someone might finally discover what he'd been looking for all his life. Marcus leaned forward in his saddle, studying Blackwood's earnest expression. "If your grandfather suspected the treasure existed, why didn't he search for it himself? He did search for years, but he was limited by his official position. He couldn't tear apart a functioning jailhouse without proper authorization. By the time the building was abandoned, he was too old for extensive physical searching." At that moment, Detective James Mitchell emerged from concealment near the creek bank, leading his horse up the slope toward the bridge. Blackwood's eyes widened in surprise at the federal investigator's appearance. "Mr. Blackwood," Mitchell said calmly, "I believe you gentlemen have been having an interesting conversation." Blackwood's face paled slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Federal business. The Richardson Gang treasure falls under federal jurisdiction, yes, but I'm more interested in your threatening note to Mr. Sullivan." "That wasn't meant as a threat," Blackwood said quickly. "I was trying to emphasize the urgency of the situation. If word spreads about treasure in the old jailhouse, this town will be overrun with fortune hunters and criminals." Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "A valid concern, which is why we're going to handle this matter quietly and efficiently." Over the following weeks, Detective James Mitchell coordinated the most unusual treasure recovery operation in territorial history. Using the Richardson Gang's meticulous ledger, federal agents traced the rightful owners of nearly every stolen item. The Riverdale bank manager's family recovered their father's gold watch and their mother's pearl brooch. The Willowbrook Ranch family got back their deed papers and family Bible, along with jewelry that had been in their family for generations. Dozens of other families throughout the territory received similar reunions with long-lost valuables. Each recovery brought tears of joy and amazement that items stolen years earlier could finally return home. Marcus's legal ownership of items that couldn't be traced to specific victims was confirmed through federal courts. The unclaimed gold bars and currency representing about 30% of the total treasure legally belonged to him as the property owner. The old jailhouse was transformed into a territorial museum with Marcus as its director. The underground chamber became the centerpiece exhibit, telling the story of the Richardson Gang and the greatest treasure. Recovery in frontier history. Henry Blackwood became Marcus's partner in operating the museum, contributing his grandfather's extensive research about local outlaw activity. The threatening note incident was quietly forgotten as the two men worked together to preserve an important piece of territorial heritage. Marcus's 40-cent investment ultimately brought him not just personal wealth, but the satisfaction of returning stolen property to families who had lost hope of ever seeing their treasures again. The old jailhouse, once a symbol of abandoned justice, became a monument to the power of doing the right thing. The Richardson Gang had planned to return for their treasure after things cooled down. They never imagined their carefully hidden wealth would eventually cool down enough to become a force for justice rather than continued crime. If you enjoyed this incredible story of discovery and justice, make sure to click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell because we have so many more amazing tales from the American frontier coming your way. Drop a comment below and let me know what you thought about Marcus's incredible discovery. Would you have handled it the same way? And if you want to support our channel and help us bring you even more incredible stories like this one, consider hitting the super thanks button. Click on the next video on your screen to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and mystery collide in the most unexpected ways.